I want to show you how to find the inverse using two different methods. So the very first function we have is 3x minus 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out what happened to our x value here. So you begin with x. From there you multiply by 3, right? So you multiply by 3. And then lastly, you subtract 6. So any x value that we plug in, for instance, let's find an x value. If I start with 1, so if I begin with 1, I multiply that by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, and then I subtract 6, which is negative 3. Let's do one more. When I plug in 2, I multiply that by 3. So 2 times 3 is 6, and then I subtract 6, and that gives me 0. So if you want to find the inverse, I'm going to put this in pink. The notation is f inverse, or f to the negative first. F inverse of x is equal to. So all we're going to do is go backwards, and inverse means opposite. So we're going to be doing the opposite. So we're going to start with x. And then instead of subtract 6, we're going to add 6. And then instead of multiplying by 3, we're going to divide by 3. So this is our inverse function. All we're doing is starting down here at the last thing that we did to it, and then we're going back up our process. All right, another way to find the exact same answer is to write the equation f of x equals 3x minus 6. Replace f of x with y because they're exactly the same thing. And if you want to find the inverse, you have to switch the x and the y. So instead of y right here, you're going to plug in x. And instead of the x right here, you're going to plug in y. Once you flip the x and the y, or switch the x and the y, you want to solve for y. So to get y alone, I would add 6 to both sides. So x plus 6 is just x plus 6, and that's equal to 3y. One last step to get y alone, and that is divide both sides by 3. So our inverse is x plus 6 over 3. So we're going to use the correct notation to write our inverse. So f inverse of x is x plus 6 all over 3. We got the exact same answer using two different strategies. So what do these inverses mean? So if I look at the original function, which is 3x minus 6, I created two ordered pairs, right? 1 comma negative 3, and then 2 comma 0. So let's take a look at plugging in an ordered pair into this inverse function. So I'm going to plug in negative 3. So if I plug in negative 3 plus 6, I'm just plugging negative 3 right there. So negative 3 plus 6 is 3, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. I'm going to plug in 0. 0 plus 6 is 6, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So you'll notice for every function in relation to its inverse, if you look at the original coordinates, x, y, the x switches to the y spot, and the y switches to the x spot. So the coordinates are flipped whenever you have our inverse. Let's take a look at this next function here, x plus 5 divided by 2. So when you plug in a value for x, like let's do 1. So you begin with x, right? Whatever value that is, in this case it's 1. Then you're going to add 5, right? So 1 plus 5 is 6, and then you divide by 2. Okay, so 6 divided by 2 is 3. Let's plug in one more x value. Let's do 3. If I plug in 3 plus 5 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So to write the inverse, f inverse of x, we're starting with x, but we're going backwards, and since it's the inverse, you're doing the opposite. So you begin with x. Instead of dividing by 2, you're going to multiply by 2. And then instead of adding 5, you're going to subtract 5. So there's our inverse. So we know that if this is the correct inverse, if I plug in the y coordinates, I should get the x value. So if I plug in 3 here, 3 times 2 is 6, minus 1 is 5. If I plug in 4, 4 times 2 is 8, minus 5 is 3. So the coordinates did flip. So to find this one more way, you can take the original function, which is x plus 5 over 2, replace f of x with y because they're exactly the same thing. Then you switch the x and the y, right? So switch the x and the y. So x equals y plus 5 over 2. And then you solve for y. So to get y alone, the opposite of dividing by 2 would be multiplying both sides by 2. So I have 2x is equal to y plus 5, because those cancel out. And then one last step to isolate, subtract 5 from both sides. So I would get y is equal to 2x minus 5, or f inverse of x is equal to 2x minus 5. So again, we got the same answer using a different process, but these should match.